Your city, your state, your country, tell me where you're listening from before we start. Because this one, I need you with me for. I had just cut into the first bite of my anniversary roast when my son-in-law reached across the table, knocked the plate clean off the edge, and told me a man my age had no business eating like that anymore. I'm Walter Nash. I'm 71 years old. 41 years I spent laying brick and block for Kessler Masonry out of Dayton, Ohio. And my hands still remember the weight of a trowel, even though it's been 6 years since I held one for a living. My hips grind when the weather turns. I've got a pacemaker the size of a pocket watch sitting under my collarbone, and I take 11 pills a day laid out in a plastic organizer my late wife bought me the year before she passed. The kind with the days of the week printed on it in letters big enough for old eyes. None of that mattered much on the third Saturday of every month. That Saturday belonged to Eleanor. My wife started the tradition 34 years ago, back when our daughter Melissa was still small enough to sit on the porch steps in her church shoes and swing her legs. Eleanor believed a family that broke bread together on a fixed day, rain or shine, good year or bad, was a family that couldn't come apart at the seams. Not really, not permanently. She called it Third Saturday. She'd start cooking Friday night a pot roast, always a pot roast, carrots and pearl onions and red potatoes braised low for 6 hours in a Dutch oven that had belonged to her mother before her. She kept the recipe on an index card in a metal box on top of the refrigerator, her handwriting slanted and careful, the corners of the card gone soft from 40 years of being pulled out and put back. Eleanor passed 4 years ago this past spring. Ovarian cancer, caught late the way it usually is, 11 weeks from the diagnosis to the last night. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding a hand that had gone thin as paper. I thought about letting Third Saturday go after that. I really did. But somewhere around the second month of sitting alone in a quiet house, I understood that if I let it go, I'd be losing her twice. So I kept it. Every third Saturday, I pull the metal box down off the refrigerator. I find her card, and I follow it the way Scripture gets followed. No shortcuts, no substitutions. Carrots first, then the onions, then the potatoes nestled in around the meat once it's had its 2 hours alone in the pot. That particular Saturday, the second week of July, I had a 7-pound chuck roast that had been braising since 10 that morning, and the house smelled the way it always smelled on Third Saturday, the way I imagine heaven smells, if I'm being honest with you. My backyard in Kettering looked the way Eleanor always kept it looking. The maple tree she planted the year Melissa was born, throwing shade clean across the patio table. The string lights I'd hung 2 summers back looped along the fence. The long farmhouse table Eleanor found at an estate sale in 1991 and refinished herself over a whole winter, sanding it down in the garage while I complained about the smell of varnish. Frank Osei arrived first, same as he always did, carrying a case of root beer because he doesn't drink and doesn't apologize for it, wearing his Cincinnati Reds cap gone soft and faded from 20 summers of wear. Frank's 74, a retired postal carrier, and he's lived next door to me for 19 years. He was at Eleanor's funeral in the front pew because I asked him to be. He was at my kitchen table 3 days after, not saying much of anything, just sitting there so the house wouldn't be as quiet. "Smells like Third Saturday," Frank said, dropping into the folding chair he'd claimed as his own years back. "Always does," I said. Melissa came 20 minutes later, carrying a green bean casserole covered in foil, her scrubs still on from a half day at Miami Valley Hospital, where she works labor and delivery. My daughter is 39 years old, sharp as her mother ever was, with Eleanor's same habit of talking with her hands when something's got her worked up. Behind her came Derek. Derek Pruitt is 41, tall, tanned, in that particular way men get from golfing on weekdays, with a handshake that lasts a beat too long because somebody once told him a firm grip closes deals. He runs a commercial insurance brokerage out of a glass office building downtown, the kind of business where you never quite know what he does all day, only that he does it in a very nice suit. He showed up to a backyard cookout in pressed slacks and a quarter zip that probably cost more than my first car payment. "Walter," he said, gripping my hand a half-second too long. "Place looks great. Grab yourself a root beer," I said, "or there's beer in the cooler if you want it." The afternoon rolled along the way good July afternoons do, slow, unhurried, the Reds game murmuring out of the little radio I keep on the porch rail, Frank arguing with my grandson Tyler about whether the bullpen was any good this year, Melissa telling a story about a delivery that had gone sideways at 2 in the morning and somehow turned out fine, the whole table laughing until Frank had to wipe his eyes with a napkin. I sat there and let myself feel, for about 45 minutes, like maybe things were exactly the way they were supposed to be. Then Derek set his glass down and looked at my plate. I'd just cut into the roast, a good thick piece falling apart the way Eleanor always wanted it to, when Derek leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough that the whole table heard it over the radio, "That's a lot of red meat for a man your age, Walter. My doctor buddy says after 70, you should be eating like a bird." I looked up at him. He was smiling, the way he always smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere past his mouth. "I've been eating like this 71 years, I said. "Seems to be working out." Sure, he said, and reached across the table for the barbecue sauce, I thought. Same as I'd think any man reaching across a table was reaching for something on it, and his forearm caught my plate clean and sent it off the edge. The roast, the potatoes, the carrots, all of it hit the flagstone with a sound that stopped every conversation at that table dead. Derek looked down at the mess for exactly 1 second. Then he shrugged, picked his fork back up, and said, "Probably doing you a favor, honestly. Man your age doesn't need the cholesterol." Nobody laughed. Not Frank, not Tyler, not Melissa. I sat there with both hands flat on that farmhouse table. Eleanor had sanded herself 30-some years ago, and I felt something climb up through my chest into the back of my throat. 71 years old, and my first instinct, God help me, was to smooth it over so nobody at my own table felt uncomfortable. Eleanor would have hated that instinct in me. She used to say I'd apologize to a chair for bumping into it. I looked down at the ruin on the patio stones. 6 hours of Eleanor's recipe soaking into the cracks between them. Then I looked up at the table, and Derek's keys were sitting right there next to his glass. A heavy black fob with a silver crest on it. The kind that starts a car worth more than I made in 3 years laying brick. I picked them up. Derek's face changed. "Walter, what are you doing?" I stood up and walked to the edge of my own koi pond, the one I dug and lined myself the summer after I retired, because Eleanor had always wanted one and never gotten around to asking. 3 feet of dark water, orange fish moving slow and lazy underneath the lily pads. I held the fob over the water for exactly as long as it took me to look him dead in the eye. Then I let it drop. It hit the surface with a small, clean splash and disappeared into the murk, and the koi scattered. I turned back around. "It's just a car key," I said. Derek's face went white as drywall compound. He was up out of his chair so fast it scraped clean across the patio. "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what that thing costs to reprogram?" "Probably not," I said. Melissa was on her feet too, the serving spoon for her casserole still in her hand, staring at me with a look I hadn't seen on her since she was 17 and I'd told her she couldn't drive to a concert in Columbus on a school night. It wasn't worry. It wasn't even anger. Not exactly. It was something closer to embarrassment. And that landed harder than anything Derek had said all afternoon. "Dad," she said, and the way she said it tight, controlled, already doing damage control in her head, told me everything about which direction the rest of this evening was going to go. Derek was pacing the edge of the pond now, hands pressed against his temples like a man doing long division in his head. "That's a $500 key, Walter. Minimum. They have to send someone out from the dealership. You knocked 40 years of my wife's recipe onto the ground," I said, and told me I was too old to eat it. "It's not a car key," Frank said from the end of the table, calm as still water, not even looking up from his root beer. "Stay out of it," Derek snapped, pointing a finger at him. "I'm just agreeing with the man," Frank said, and took a slow sip. I sat back down at my empty place and looked at the flagstones where my dinner used to be. The afternoon had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. It was the particular silence of a yard where everybody is waiting on somebody else to say the thing nobody wants to be first to say. And in all that quiet, with Derek pacing and Tyler suddenly very interested in the grass, I noticed my daughter hadn't once asked if I was all right. Not once. The last of them left a little after 7. I stood on my back porch and listened to Kettering settle into evening, a sprinkler 2 yards over, somebody's dog working itself into a lather at a passing car, a mourning dove doing its slow, sad call from somewhere up in the maple. I went inside and started cleaning, Because there's a rhythm to cleaning up after people that steadies a man, and I've needed steadying more than most these last 4 years. Stack the plates. Wrap the leftovers that survived. Scrub the grate while it's still warm enough that the char comes loose easy. Eleanor used to stand next to me at this sink, drying whatever I washed, going over the afternoon, who seemed tired, who ate too much, whether my brother Sam was ever going to fix the muffler on that truck. I could still feel the shape of her missing beside me, the way your tongue keeps finding a gap where a tooth used to be. My phone rang while I was rinsing the last serving dish. Melissa. I dried my hands on the towel with the little cardinals stitched on it, the one Eleanor bought at a craft fair in Yellow Springs the year before she died, and I answered, "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad." Her voice was flat, controlled, her nurse voice, the one she uses on families in the middle of the night when she doesn't want them to see her worried. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "The key fob." A pause. "Do you understand what that's going to cost to replace?" Derek already called the dealership. They're saying $600 minimum, and that's if they can even get the part before September. I set the towel down on the counter. Outside, the mourning dove kept up its slow, mournful noise. "It'll cost what it costs," I said. "Dad, I know he shouldn't have knocked your plate. I was there. I saw it." "Then you know what he said to me." "I know." Something tightened at the edges of her voice. "But you throwing his key in the pond, that doesn't make it better. It just makes everything more complicated than it needed to be." I pulled out my chair at the end of the table, the one with the leg Eleanor always meant to shim and never got to, and I sat down. Across from me, her chair was empty. Same blue cushion from the Target in Beaver Creek, 6 years old now, a little faded on the side that catches the afternoon sun. "Sweetheart," I said, "you called me tonight, after what happened at my table, in my yard, at a table your mother refinished with her own 2 hands, and your first question was about a key fob." The line went quiet enough I could hear her breathing. "I'm asking because Derek's upset," she said finally. "Derek knocked my dinner on the ground and told me I was too old to eat it," I said. "I'm not asking you to pick a side, Melissa. I'm just telling you what happened, plain." "I know what happened," she said, and now there was something pulling at her voice that sounded less like anger and more like the particular exhaustion of a woman who's been holding 2 things apart with both hands for longer than she can say. "I was there, Dad." "Then you know he never once said he was sorry." Another pause, longer this time. "He'll come around," she said. "He just needs a little time." "Okay," I said. "So you'll think about the key." I looked across the table at her empty chair, at the faded cushion, and I told her I'd think about it. And we said our goodnights, and I sat there a long while after in the particular quiet of a house where somebody used to be and isn't anymore. The refrigerator hummed. The clock over the stove ticked along, same as it always had. And somewhere at the bottom of my koi pond sat a $600 key fob. And for the first time all evening, I let myself think the thought I'd been pushing off since Derek shrugged at my ruined dinner and picked his fork back up. He hadn't knocked that plate by accident. 3 weeks went by the way uncomfortable weeks do, when you're 71 and living alone in a house with too many empty chairs in it, slow in the mornings, faster by afternoon, and then gone all at once when you look up and it's the 3rd Saturday again and nobody's called to ask what you're bringing. Melissa texted twice, both times about Derek, how the dealership had confirmed the cost, how she hoped I was thinking about what I'd said I'd think about. I was thinking about other things. The first visit came on a Wednesday, 16 days after the cookout. I was in the garage changing the oil on my old Silverado when Derek's car eased into my driveway. Dark green, foreign, the kind of vehicle that costs more than my house did when I bought it in 1988. He climbed out alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled, hands loose in his pockets, the relaxed version of Derek he only ever brought out when he wanted something. Walter. He crouched down next to the truck and studied the oil pan like a man, pretending an interest in mechanical things he'd never once had. "How you holding up?" "Truck's running fine," I said, not looking up. He laughed like I'd told a joke. "Listen, I wanted to come by, clear the air a little. Things got out of hand a few weeks back." "Things got knocked off a plate," I said. His jaw tightened, but the smile held. "Fair enough." He stood, looked around my garage, the pegboard of tools, the old license plates I'd nailed up over the years, the photograph of me and Eleanor at our 30th anniversary sitting on the corner of the workbench where it sat for a decade. His eyes moved across all of it the way a man's eyes move when he's doing math in his head. You know, he said, the market around here right now is genuinely wild. Houses in this neighborhood, 3-bed, 2-bath like yours, are going for numbers that would have been unthinkable 5 years back. I pulled the drain plug and let the old oil run black and slow into the catch pan. That right? House, 2 streets over, same square footage as yours, sold in 6 days last month, cash offer, no inspection contingency. He said the number carefully, the way people in his line of work always say, numbers, watching your face while they do it. You're sitting on a real asset here, Walter. Equity most folks your age would kill to have. Derek, I said. I set the wrench down and looked at him straight on for the first time since he'd pulled in. I laid the block for this garage myself in 2003. Poured that slab on a Saturday in August, 101 degrees, because the contractor wanted 4 times what the materials cost. This isn't an asset. It's where I live. He held my eyes a second, then looked away first. I understand that. I'm just thinking about your future. I'll let you know when I need help thinking about my future, I said, and picked the wrench back up. He left 5 minutes later. The second visit came that Saturday, and this time Melissa came with him. She brought coffee from the place downtown she knows I like, and hugged me at the door and told me she'd missed me, and it made my chest ache because I believed every word of it. Derek stood a step behind her shoulder, smiling with all his teeth. We sat on the back porch. The coffee was good. The talk started easy, Melissa telling me about a delivery, a set of twins born 6 weeks early who'd both made it, her face doing the thing it does when something genuinely good has happened in her line of work, the thing that looks exactly like her mother's face used to look. Then Derek set his cup down. You know, Melissa and I have been talking, he said, about the future, long-term planning, that kind of thing. That's smart, I said. We've been looking into some options. He pulled his phone out, tapped it a few times, turned the screen toward me. Clean photographs, bright hallways, smiling gray-haired people, a dining room dressed up like a hotel restaurant. There's a place out in Centerville. It's not what you picture when you hear the words assisted living, Walter. I want you to really look at it before you... I'm not moving to Centerville, I said. Melissa leaned forward, and I could see what it cost her to do it. Her hands wrapped tight around her coffee mug. Dad, we're not saying you have to do anything tomorrow. We're just saying this house, it's a lot for one person. The yard alone. I like the yard, I said. The maintenance keeps me busy. She looked at Derek. Derek looked at her. That particular married couple exchange that happens in under a second and somehow holds an entire conversation inside it. I watched it happen and felt something turn over low in my stomach. Daddy. She said the word she only ever used when she was reaching hard for something. The word Eleanor used to tease her for, as a little girl. It landed different now than it used to. We love you, she said. We just want what's best for you. I know you do, I said, and meant it. God help me. Meant every word, because whatever else was happening, she was still my daughter, and she still had her mother's eyes when she was scared. But I also knew that Derek Pruitt had stood in my garage 2 weeks back, calculating my square footage. And now he was sitting on my porch with brochures for a retirement community. And those two things did not feel like coincidence to me. They felt like a man building a case. I drove them out after lunch, stood on the porch, and watched Derek's car back down the driveway. Melissa's hand small in the passenger window, waving in a way that felt like it was asking me for something I didn't yet know how to give her. Back inside, I sat at my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and let my thoughts run. The market, the equity, long-term planning. I thought about how his eyes had moved across my garage like he was pricing it room by room. And I thought about something Melissa had mentioned offhand a few days before. Almost like an afterthought that Derek was having someone come by soon to give a quote on some gutter repairs I'd never asked anybody to look at. A quote from a man I hadn't called, arranged by a man who twice now had found reasons to bring up what my house was worth. I got up, walked to the window, looked out at my backyard. The farmhouse table sat right where it always sat. The pond caught the afternoon light, and somewhere down in it was a $600 car key. The maple Eleanor planted through the same shade it had thrown for 39 summers. Something was wrong here. I didn't have proof of it yet, but 41 years laying brick teaches a man to feel a crack in a foundation long before he can see daylight through it. Frank Osei knocked on my back door the next Saturday morning. I was at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and Eleanor's recipe box open in front of me. I don't know why I'd pulled it down. I hadn't been planning to cook a thing, but sometimes I just open it and sit there looking at her handwriting, the way she wrote her lowercase g's with that little loop at the bottom, the ingredients she underlined twice because she considered them non-negotiable. It isn't rational. Grief rarely is. Frank let himself in the way he always does. 2 knocks, and then the door, not waiting for an answer. He had his coffee thermos in one hand and his Reds cap in the other, turning it slow by the brim the way he does when something's sitting heavy on him. "You got a minute?" he asked. "I've got the whole morning," I said. "Sit." He sat, set his thermos down, and looked at the recipe box for a second without saying anything about it, which is one of the things I've always respected about Frank. He doesn't fill a silence just to hear himself do it. "I've been going back and forth on telling you something," he said. "Sitting on it a few weeks now, and I finally decided sitting on it any longer wasn't doing you any favors." I closed the box. "Tell me." He turned the cap over in his hands once more, then set it flat on the table. "About a month back, this would have been late June, a week or so before your cookout, I was out front trimming the privet along the line between our yards. You know how it gets if you let it go." "I know." "Derek pulled up in that car of his," Frank said. "Had somebody with him. Younger fella, maybe 30, dressed for a listing appointment dark suit, one of those leather folders under his arm. They walked your whole property line, Walter. Front, side, all the way around back along the fence. Younger one was taking notes on his phone the whole time. Derek was pointing things out the roofline, the lot size, that pond you dug. Something went very still in my chest. I figured maybe he was getting an estimate on something," Frank said. "Repairs, maybe." Almost didn't think twice about it. He looked at me straight on. Then I heard what he said. "What'd he say?" Frank's jaw worked once, like a man repeating something in his head so many times it's gone bitter in his mouth. He said, "Once the old man settled into a facility, this lot alone is worth $650, easy, and the house on top of it pushes us past $1 million. Then he said, "Chad, get me comps on the whole block by Monday." The kitchen went very quiet. I heard the refrigerator hum. I heard the maple moving outside in the July air. I heard my own pulse doing something it doesn't usually do on a Saturday morning. "Frank, you're certain of the words." He looked at me with the face of a man who's spent 74 years being careful about what he'll swear to. "I was 15 feet away, Walter. The privet doesn't make noise, and I've got both my ears." I nodded slow. "The younger one, you said, Chad? Left a card in your mailbox on the way out. Saw him do it myself. Thought that was strange, leaving a card on a house that isn't for sale." He reached into his shirt pocket and set it on the table next to Eleanor's box. White card, heavy stock, clean type. Even from across the kitchen I could read it. "Chad Merriweather, Vantage Point Realty, Dayton, Ohio." "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Frank said, and his voice had gone rough at the edges the way a man's voice goes when he's carrying guilt he doesn't rightly think he should have to carry. Kept telling myself maybe I misheard. Maybe there was some other explanation. I walked over and picked the card up, turned it over in my fingers. "You didn't mishear a thing," I said. "No," Frank said. "I didn't." We sat with that a while, the two of us, the way men our age sit with something heavy once it's landed on the table between them. He poured coffee from his thermos into the mug I keep out for him without me having to ask. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay in Eleanor's side of the bed, I still call it that, 4 years on. And I don't suppose I'll ever call it anything else, and I turned the whole thing over. A man doesn't insult his father-in-law's plate over nothing. A man doesn't bring brochures for a facility unprompted. A man doesn't walk a property line with an appraiser and use the word comps about a house that isn't his. Around 2 in the morning, I got up, went down to the den, and dug through the metal filing box where I keep the important papers, the deed, the will, Eleanor's insurance documents I never got around to filing away properly. And there, behind a folder I hadn't opened in over a year, I found something that stopped me cold. A letter from an elder law attorney, dated 8 months back, addressed to me, that I had no memory of receiving. Melissa's name was listed as the point of contact on the file, not mine. I read it twice. It was a general informational packet on something called a durable power of attorney. the kind any responsible family might send along out of caution. Nothing sinister on its face, but I hadn't asked for it, and I hadn't opened this file in a year, which meant somebody else had put it there. I sat at my late wife's kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning with that letter in my hands, and I made a decision I should have made the day Derek's arm swept my plate onto the stones. I called my nephew Marcus the next morning. Marcus is 34, my brother's boy, and he's spent the last 9 years as a paralegal for an elder law firm downtown, the kind of firm that exists specifically because families like mine sometimes need somebody in their corner who knows exactly how these things go. I told him everything. The plate, the pond, the 2 visits, Frank and the privet hedge, and the card from Chad Merriweather, the letter I'd found in my own filing box that I never remembered receiving. Marcus went quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, "Uncle Walter, I want you to do exactly 3 things, and I want you to do them this week." The first was simple: call the attorney whose name was on that letterhead directly, ask if any paperwork had been filed or requested using my name, and get it in writing either way. The second was to quietly get a locksmith out, to change every exterior lock on the house, no explanation needed to anyone. The third was the one that took some doing. Marcus wanted me to invite everybody back for the next 3rd Saturday, Melissa, Derek, Frank, the whole table, and to let him come along as my nephew, stopping by. Nothing more said than that. "You think he's really trying to get power of attorney over me?" I said, without me even knowing. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that somebody requested informational materials on your behalf, using your daughter's contact information 8 months ago, and never told you. I think that's worth understanding fully before we assume the worst. But I also think you should stop assuming the best." I called the attorney's office that Monday. A paralegal there confirmed, after some back and forth and a signed release I had to fax over from the library because my own printer's been broken since March, that yes, an inquiry had been made 8 months prior regarding capacity planning documentation, and that the inquiry had listed my daughter as the requesting party, with a secondary contact number that, when I asked her to read it back to me, matched Derek's cell phone exactly. I sat with that for a long while. The next 3rd Saturday came around hot and still, no breeze at all off the maple, and I made the roast the way I always make it: carrots first, then onions, then the potatoes, because whatever else was coming that afternoon, Eleanor's kitchen was still Eleanor's kitchen, and I wasn't about to let anybody take that away from me too. Frank came early like always, root beer in hand. Melissa arrived 20 minutes later with her casserole, and Derek trailing a step behind her carrying a slim leather folder under his arm that he set down on the end of the table like it belonged there. Marcus showed up a few minutes after, in a golf shirt, nothing formal, and shook Derek's hand with a smile that gave away absolutely nothing. We ate for the better part of an hour before anybody said a word about anything real. The roast was good. Frank told a story about a customer on his old mail route who tried to tip him in lottery tickets every Christmas for a decade. Tyler laughed so hard he nearly choked on his corn. For a little while, sitting there at that table with the string lights starting to glow as the light went gold, I let myself believe the afternoon might just stay an afternoon. Then Derek reached for the folder. "Walter," he said, "I know things have been tense. I wanted to bring something today that might help clear the air. Some paperwork Melissa and I have been putting together just to make sure everything's protected for you going forward." He slid the folder toward me. I didn't open it. "Before you say anything else," I said, "I want to ask you something plain, and I want a plain answer. 8 months ago, did you contact an elder law attorney using my daughter's name and your own phone number, asking about power of attorney paperwork for me, without my knowledge?" The color went out of Derek's face the same way it had gone out of it the day I dropped his key in the pond, except this time it didn't come back. "Walter, it wasn't like that. It was just informational. Every family should have that stuff in place." "That's not what I asked you," I said. "I asked if you did it without my knowledge." Melissa had gone very still, her fork halfway to her plate, looking between the two of us like the ground had shifted under the table, and she was trying to figure out which way was still level. "Derek," she said slowly, "what is he talking about?" "Melissa," he started. "Frank," I said, not raising my voice, "would you tell my daughter what you told me a few weeks back? About the hedge and the young man with the folder?" and what you heard Derek say about this property. Frank set his root beer down, took his cap off out of respect for the moment, though nobody had asked him to, and told it plain, the same way he'd told it to me the walk around the property line. The appraiser named Chad, the number Derek had thrown out for the lot once the old man was settled somewhere else. Melissa's face went through about 4 different things while he talked, and none of them were good for Derek. That's not Frank. You weren't even that close. You couldn't have heard. I was 15 feet off with a hedge trimmer in my hand, and both my ears working fine, Frank said, calm as he'd been the day of the cookout. I know what I heard. Marcus, I said, would you explain what you found out this week, plain and simple for Melissa? Marcus laid it out clean, the 8-month-old inquiry. Derek's number listed as the contact. The letter that had sat in my own filing box for the better part of a year without my knowledge. He didn't raise his voice either. He didn't need to. The facts did the work on their own. Melissa turned to Derek very slowly. You used my name, she said. Not a question. I was trying to protect the family's interests, Derek said. And even as the words left him, I watched him understand how they sounded out loud, in front of people, in the open July air, instead of however he'd rehearsed them in his head. Walter's getting older. Things happen. I didn't want us caught flat-footed if... If what? Melissa said. If he got sick. If he died? You wanted paperwork in place so you'd have a say over my father's house before he's even sick. That's not fair, isn't it? She said. Nobody said anything for a moment. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up, and then, mercifully, stopped. Derek looked around the table at Frank, who wasn't looking at him at all, just refilling his mug, at Tyler, staring hard at his plate, at Marcus, who met his eyes without any particular anger in his own, which somehow made it worse. Then he looked at Melissa, and whatever he saw in her face made him reach for his folder and stand up. I think I should go, he said. Nobody argued with him. He straightened his collar the automatic way men do when their hands don't know what else to be doing. He looked at Melissa one more time like he had a sentence forming, and then thought better of it. He walked to the gate at the side of the yard, the one that's needed oiling for 2 years, and it creaked the whole way, and then he was gone. Nobody watched him go. That was the thing I noticed most. Not Frank, not Tyler, not Marcus. Nobody turned to mark the exit of a man who'd walked into that yard 3 hours earlier with a folder full of plans and the easy assumption that the whole table would arrange itself around whatever he'd decided. Frank reached for the serving spoon. There's still half a roast on this platter, he said, in the voice of a man raising a practical matter that deserves some attention. Shame to let it go cold. Melissa laughed, and it came out surprised, the kind of laugh that arrives before you've decided whether to let it. It was enough to break something open in that yard, some tight thing that had been sitting in the air since Derek reached for that leather folder, and changed the whole temperature of the afternoon. Tyler got up and went to check the grill without being asked, because that's the kind of boy he's turning into. Frank poured Melissa a fresh glass of tea and set it down in front of her with both hands, careful, the way Eleanor used to set things down, like the act of it meant something on its own. Your mother would have had plenty to say about all this, Frank said. She'd have had it in a very particular order, I said. And that got a real laugh out of Melissa, the kind that remembers. She hadn't moved from her chair. Her hands were open in her lap, palms up the way hands go when a body's finally stopped bracing for something and doesn't quite know yet what to do with the relief of it. I don't know what I'm going to do, she said quietly, not performing anything anymore. Just saying it. You don't have to know today, I said. She looked down at her hands. I'm scared, Dad. I know. What if I'm alone again? At my age, starting over. You won't be alone, I said. You've got a father who's not going anywhere, and a nephew who apparently knows more about elder law than either of us ever wanted to learn, and a neighbor who hears everything through a hedge whether you want him to or not. That got a small, wet laugh out of her. She reached over and took my hand, not dramatic about it, just took hold of it the way people take hold of something they need to be holding on to, and held on. Frank set a plate down in front of me, roast, carrots, onions, the potatoes soaked through with the drippings the way Eleanor always wanted them. Eat it while it's hot, he said, in the tone of a man who's done his part and considers the matter closed. I looked at the plate, then I looked around that table, Frank back in his seat with his thermos, Tyler at the grill checking coals that didn't need checking, Marcus quietly closing his own folder of notes with 2 soft clicks. Melissa beside me with her hand still in mine, looking out at the yard where her mother had spent 34 years building something worth protecting. I picked up my fork. There's something I've come to understand out of all this. Something I probably should have learned decades earlier, but needed a ruined plate and a pond full of car keys to finally see clean. Kindness isn't the same thing as permission. And keeping the peace isn't the same thing as having it. I spent years telling myself that staying quiet was a kind of protecting. It wasn't. It was just a slower way of losing everything, one small surrender at a time. If I could go back and hand myself one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't wait until a man is standing in your driveway, pricing your life like a listing, before you decide it's worth defending. I believe things line up the way they're meant to when it matters. Frank was trimming that hedge for a reason. Marcus picked up that phone on the first ring for a reason. And every single person who sat at my table that Saturday was there, at that exact moment, for a reason. This is the part I'll carry. Not the folder, not the confrontation, not Derek walking out that gate and the creak it made behind him. It's my daughter sitting beside me with her hand in mine, telling me she's scared, and me getting to tell her she doesn't have to be. Not with this family, not at this table. That's the only kind of getting even worth telling anybody about. Not the kind that tears a family down to the studs. The kind that finally, after everything, builds it back up stronger than it was before. If any of this found its way into you today, tell me where you're listening from. Tell me who you're holding on to at your own table. And stay close, because next third Saturday, I'll be right back here with you.